The wind was a thief. It stole warmth from the skin and breath from the lungs, a high, thin lament that scoured the rocky plateau of the Atacama Proving Grounds. Here, at 12,000 feet, the world was stripped to its essentials: sun, stone, and the vast, indifferent sky. Sergeant Anya Sharma felt the pressure change in her sinuses, a familiar ache. She stood apart from the main group, her small frame swallowed by her gear, observing not the target, but the conditions. The target was a constant. The conditions were a river, always in flux. "Look at her," Lieutenant Miller murmured, his voice a low sneer carried on the wind, to the knot of junior snipers clustered around him. He was young, with the unearned confidence that came from a fresh commission and the reflected glow of their commander, Colonel Rex Thorne. Logistics must have dropped her off at the wrong range. This is where the big boys play. A few of the younger Marines chuckled, the sound thin and sharp in the alpine air. They were all broad-shouldered, sculpted by the gym and the relentless swagger of their trade. They looked at Sharma, who barely cleared 5'4" in her boots, and saw a clerical error, a box ticker. Colonel Thorne, a man whose voice was permanently set to a parade ground boom, clapped a hand on Miller's shoulder. "Give her a chance, Lieutenant. The brass wants to see full integration. We've all got to play our part." His tone was magnanimous, but his eyes, when they flicked to Sharma, were pure dismissal. She was a prop in his theater of command, nothing more. He turned his attention back to his chosen shooter, a hulking gunnery sergeant named Decker, who was currently setting up the experimental XR-50 rifle on its massive tripod. "Decker here is going to show our distinguished guest what American innovation looks like." The guest, a quiet four-star general named Hayes, stood slightly behind Thorne, his expression unreadable behind dark glasses. He offered no comment, his gaze sweeping the horizon. Sharma ignored them all. Her focus was on the subtle tells of the environment. She watched a thread of dust devil spin up in a ravine 1,000 meters out, noting its direction. Clockwise, a high-pressure system. She observed the mirage shimmering off the distant rocks, not boiling upwards but flowing sideways like a slow river, a sign of stratified air temperatures. The range flags placed every 500 meters told a liar's tale. The first 3 hung limp. The 4th, at 2,000 meters, fluttered east. The 5th, barely a speck, whipped west. The wind was a serpent coiling and twisting in the valleys between her position and the target. The target itself was a 10-inch plate of AR-500 steel, a tiny silver glint on a mountainside 4,500 meters away, nearly 3 miles. It wasn't a practical combat shot, it was a statement, a demonstration of a new rifle, new ammunition, and, most importantly, the dominance of Colonel Thorne's advanced marksmanship unit. Master Sergeant Elias Vance, the range safety officer, and the only man on the plateau whose tenure was measured in decades, not years, walked a slow circuit around the firing point. He was a man made of leather and quiet disapproval, his face a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles. He paused near Sharma, his eyes following her gaze. He didn't speak to her, but he saw what she was seeing. He saw her Kestrel 5700 weather meter held low, shielded from the direct wind to get a baseline reading at their position. He saw the way she wasn't looking at the target through her spotting scope, but at the air itself. "Variable density," she said, her voice quiet, meant for herself, but he caught it. "And a significant temperature inversion layer around 3,000 meters. Vance gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He'd seen 100 hotshot officers and trigger pullers come and go. He knew the difference between someone who looked and someone who saw. "Thorne wants a first-round hit for the general," Vance said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that didn't carry. "He's been promising it for weeks." "He won't get it," Sharma stated, not as an opinion, but as a fact. not with Decker's current hold. Vance glanced over at the main group. Decker was dialing his scope with theatrical confidence, calling out his adjustments to the fawning Lieutenant Miller. Elevation, 142.2 mils. Wind, 3.8 mils left. The numbers were based on the range's integrated sensor network, a system Thorne had spent millions on, a system that measured conditions at the firing point and at the target, assuming a straight, uniform line between the two. It was a fool's assumption. The system's lying, Sharma murmured. It's averaging the data. Up here, averages get you killed. Vance knew she was right. The system was a contractor's dream and a shooter's nightmare, designed to produce clean, predictable data in a world that was anything but. It couldn't account for the chaotic thermals rising from the sun-drenched canyons, or the katabatic winds pouring down unseen couloirs. Let the colonel run his show, Vance advised, his tone weary. Just keep your head down, Sergeant. He moved on, his duty to observe, not to interfere unless something became actively unsafe. Sharma gave a slight nod, her attention already gone, back to the river of air. She pulled out her datapad, a ruggedized military model, and began inputting her own observations. Barometric pressure, 688 HPA, temperature 4 degrees Celsius, humidity 12%. She began building her own ballistic solution, one based not on the range's flawed automation, but on the subtle language of the land. She factored in Coriolis effect, the subtle drift caused by the Earth's rotation, a significant factor at this extreme range. She added spin drift, the tendency of the bullet to move in the direction of its rifling twist. Then came the hard part, the wind. She couldn't measure it directly out there, so she had to read it. She divided the bullet's path into 9 500-meter segments. Segment 1 and 2, minimal wind. Segment 3, she estimated a 5-off tailwind based on the shimmer of heat off a rock formation. Segment 4 and 5, the wind switched, a 10-mile crosswind from the left, indicated by the flag and the drift of a lone condor circling high above. Segments 6 through 9 were the real problem, the inversion layer. The bullet would pass from a cold layer of air into a warmer one, then back into cold. Each transition would nudge it, subtly altering its trajectory. The air would be thicker, then thinner, then thicker again. It was like trying to shoot through 3 different planets. Her calculations were a complex tapestry of physics and instinct. While Decker and Miller were talking about pure mechanics, Sharma was engaged in an act of artistry. She finished her preliminary model. Her solution was wildly different from Decker's. Elevation, 151.7 mils. Windage, a complex multi-stage hold. 2.1 mils left for the first 2,500 meters, shifting to a 6.4 mil left hold for the remainder of the flight, with a final adjustment for the terminal zone. It was a bizarre, counterintuitive solution that the range's computer would have dismissed as an error. "Firing point is ready," Thorne boomed, his voice radiating smug certainty. "General, if you'll direct your attention to the monitor, you'll see a first-person view from the spotter scope. Decker, you are cleared to fire when ready." Decker settled behind the massive rifle. The XR-50 was a beast, its barrel shrouded in a carbon fiber heat sink. It fired a custom-loaded .416 caliber solid brass projectile designed for extreme long-range stability. He took a few deep, methodical breaths, the ritual of the sniper. The junior officers leaned forward, their faces tight with anticipation. "Sending it." Decker's voice was flat, professional. The rifle's report was a deafening crack boom that echoed off the surrounding peaks. A physical punch to the chest. The concussion kicked up a cloud of dust around the tripod. Everyone watched the monitor, which showed a magnified view of the distant target plate. The bullet's flight time would be over 8 seconds. 1, 2. Sharma counted the seconds. her eyes not on the monitor but on the space between here and there, imagining the bullet's lonely journey. 3, 4. It was crossing the first major ravine now, hitting the shift in wind. 5, 6. Entering the inversion layer. The air density changes. The bullet wobbles, a micro-oscillation no one can see. 7, 8. A puff of dust and rock erupted from the mountainside, a good 15 feet to the right and 10 feet low of the target. A clean miss. A collective, disappointed sigh went through the junior snipers. Lieutenant Miller's face fell. Colonel Thorne's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "Damn it, Decker!" Thorne barked, his voice losing its magnanimous tone. "What was that? The computer gave you a perfect solution." "Wind shear, sir," Decker said, his voice tight with frustration as he looked up from the scope. "It's a ghost out there. The mirage is boiling." "The mirage is not an excuse," Thorne snapped. "The system is designed to account for that. Recalculate and fire again. The general doesn't have all day." The pressure on the firing line immediately spiked. The easy confidence evaporated, replaced by a tense, hurried energy. Decker, flustered, quickly ran the computer's recommended correction. He adjusted his scope, settled in again, and fired. The second shot was closer, but still a miss. This time it struck high and to the right. The wind had shifted again in the few minutes between shots. It was a living thing, and they were treating it like a static number on a screen. General Hayes remained silent, his arms crossed. His silence was more damning than any reprimand. Thorne was sweating now, the cold mountain air doing nothing to cool the heat of his embarrassment. He was losing control of his demonstration, of his narrative. "Miller, get on the horn to the meteorological unit," Thorne commanded. "I want real-time atmospheric data from every sensor on this range, now." "Sir, they're already feeding it to the system," Miller replied, his voice strained. "Then the system is broken. Get me a technician." Thorne was shouting now, his authority cracking under the strain of failure. He was looking for someone, anyone to blame. His eyes swept the plateau and landed on Sharma, standing alone, a silent rebuke to his chaos. "You!" he yelled, pointing a finger at her. "Sergeant, what are you doing just standing there? Get over here and help Spot. Maybe a fresh set of eyes will do some good." It wasn't a request. It was an order born of desperation, a way to spread the blame for the inevitable third miss. Sharma walked over, her movements calm and deliberate. The air around the firing point was thick with anxiety. She didn't look at Thorne. She knelt beside Decker, who refused to meet her eyes, his face flushed with shame. She placed her small spotting scope on its own tripod, its optics far clearer than the standard issue equipment the others were using. She focused, not on the target, but on the vapor trail left by Decker's second shot, a faint, ghostly corkscrew hanging in the air for a few precious seconds before the wind tore it apart. It told her everything she needed to know. The bullet had started stable, then began to yaw as it hit the turbulent air in the second half of its flight. Her initial multi-stage wind hold was correct. The computer was trying to apply one single wind value to a multi-part problem. "Well," Thorne demanded, looming over her, "what do you see?" "I see the problem, sir," Sharma said, her voice even. "And? Your firing solution is wrong." She didn't couch it in soft language. She didn't say, "It might be off," or "we could try." She stated it as a fact. The entire firing line went silent. Lieutenant Miller looked horrified. Decker stared at her, half in anger, half in disbelief. To challenge a colonel so directly, especially in front of a general, was career suicide. Thorne's face purpled. "Excuse me, Sergeant, are you telling me that my multi-million-dollar integrated targeting system and my most experienced shooter are wrong, and you are right?" He couldn't even bring himself to finish the sentence. So profound was his contempt. "Yes, sir," Sharma said, her gaze steady as she finally looked up at him. "The system is averaging the wind. The wind isn't average. The first half of the flight path requires a 2.1 mil hold left. The second half, as the bullet crosses the canyon and enters the inversion, requires a 6.4 mil hold left. The elevation is also off by 9.5 mils. The air is thinner at the peak than the system is calculating for." Miller scoffed audibly. "That's impossible. You can't have two different wind holds for one shot." "You can if you understand ballistics," Sharma replied coolly, turning back to her scope. Thorne was about to explode. He opened his mouth, a torrent of rage ready to be unleashed, but a quiet voice cut him off. "Let her shoot." Every head turned. It was General Hayes. He had stepped forward, his sunglasses now off. His eyes were pale blue and missed nothing. He looked from Thorne's apoplectic face to Sharma's calm, focused demeanor. "Sir?" Thorne stammered, caught completely off guard. "But she's not rated on this system. She's a support NCO we had assigned for observation." He was inventing a cover story on the fly. "I didn't ask for her resume, Colonel," Hayes said, his voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "I said, let her shoot. Your way has resulted in 2 misses. We're burning daylight. Let's see what the sergeant can do." Thorne's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. He was trapped. To refuse would be to directly disobey a 4-star general. To agree would be to admit his own failure. He ground his teeth and spat out a single word. "Fine." He turned to Sharma. "The rifle is yours, Sergeant. Don't embarrass my unit." The threat was clear. Sharma said nothing. She moved to the XR-50. Decker got up and stepped away without a word, his face a thundercloud. The rifle was set up for his larger frame. Sharma had to adjust the stock and the cheek weld, her movements efficient and practiced. The rifle looked absurdly large with her, but as she settled behind it, she seemed to merge with the machine. She became a part of the weapon system. She ignored the high-tech digital scope attached to the rifle. It was slaved to the same flawed computer system. Instead, she began dialing the adjustments on her own scope, the one from her personal kit, which she now began to attach to the rifle's top rail. "What are you doing?" Miller blurted out. "The Mark 8 is already zeroed." "She's using her own glass," Vance said, stepping forward slightly. It was the first time he had intervened. "Let her work." Sharma worked in a bubble of concentration. She clicked the turrets on her scope, the sound crisp and precise in the tense silence. She dialed in her elevation, 151.7 mils. Then she paused, looking not through the scope, but at the wind. A gust hit the plateau, and she waited for it to pass. She was waiting for a lull, a predictable, repeatable moment in the chaos of the atmosphere. It was called timing the cycle. Firing a 4,500-meter shot is not about power, a voice from her past echoed in her mind. Her first instructor, a legendary marksman long since retired. "It's a math problem. Solve for X and the physics will do the rest." She looked at Thorne. "Colonel, I need everyone to step back from the firing line. The muzzle blast will kick up too much dust and disturb the air." Thorne, still fuming, gave a curt gesture. The group of junior snipers, their mockery forgotten and replaced by a stunned curiosity, shuffled back. General Hayes and Master Sergeant Vance remained where they were. Sharma settled in. She took a slow, deep breath, then let half of it out, finding the natural respiratory pause. Her heartbeat slowed, a steady, calm rhythm in her ears. She looked through the scope. At this magnification, the mirage was a boiling river, distorting the target. But she had learned to read it, to shoot through it. She knew the target was slightly lower than it appeared. She placed the reticle not on the target, but far to the left and high, a seemingly random point in the empty blue sky. This was her hold. It accounted for wind, for spin, for the rotation of the planet. It was a point of faith, backed by a mountain of data she had calculated in her head. "This is a joke," Miller whispered to another lieutenant. "She's aiming at nothing. No way she hits that." Sharma's finger rested on the trigger. She wasn't thinking about the colonel or the general or the mocking juniors. She was in the bubble. There was only her, the rifle, the air, and the target. She felt the brief lull in the wind cycle begin. The air held its breath. Now. She didn't jerk the trigger. She pressed it, a smooth, clean break that was more a release of tension than an application of force. The XR-50 roared, slamming back into her shoulder. The recoil was immense, but she rode it, her form perfect, keeping the scope as steady as possible to see the trace, the faint vapor trail of the bullet's flight. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound had been. All eyes were on the monitor. 1, 2. The bullet was climbing, reaching the apex of its long parabolic arc, nearly 300 feet above the line of sight. 3, 4. It crossed the canyon, hitting the wall of wind she had predicted. Sharma saw the trace shimmer and bend, a slight, almost invisible correction. 5, 6. It entered the turbulent inversion layer. She held her breath. This was the moment of truth. 7, 8. The flight time felt eternal. 9. A sharp, metallic ping echoed faintly back across the vast distance, a sound so small it was almost lost in the wind. On the monitor, the 10-inch steel plate, which had been a solid white square, vanished. In its place was a gaping black hole. The bullet had passed clean through, a perfect dead-center hit. For a full 5 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The junior snipers stared at the screen, their mouths hanging open. Lieutenant Miller looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Decker's face was a pale, stunned mask. Colonel Thorne's jaw was slack. The bluster, the arrogance, the entire carefully constructed edifice of his command persona had been vaporized. He stared at the screen, then at Sharma, then back at the screen. He looked like a man who had just seen the laws of physics rewritten in front of him. Master Sergeant Vance allowed himself a small, grim smile. He had known. He had seen the quiet professionalism, the deep well of competence behind her unassuming exterior. General Hayes was the first to move. He walked over to Sharma, who was already calmly ejecting the spent casing, the brass hot in the cold air. He stopped in front of her. She rose to her feet, her face impassive. "Sergeant," the general said, his voice low and filled with a respect that cut through the silence. "That was the finest piece of marksmanship I have ever witnessed. What's your name?" "Sergeant Sharma, sir," she replied. "Sharma," Hayes repeated, nodding slowly. He looked at her closely. "I've heard that name before. You were with Task Force 17 in the Hindu Kush, weren't you? The asset they called Valkyrie." The name dropped into the silence like a grenade. Task Force 17 was a Tier 1 Special Missions unit, its operations spoken of only in whispers. Valkyrie was a legend, a ghost sniper credited with a series of strategically critical, statistically impossible shots that had saved dozens of lives and altered the course of several key operations. A shooter whose identity was so closely guarded that most of the conventional military thought the call sign was just a myth, a campfire story. Sharma simply looked at the general. She didn't confirm or deny it. She didn't have to. Her dog tags were tucked inside her shirt, but her identity was now laid bare by the single, impossible shot. I see," was all Hayes said. He knew he was looking at a living legend, an operator who had been deliberately placed in this backwater training unit for a quiet tour, likely after burning out from years in the shadows. He turned, his gaze to Colonel Thorne, and the temperature on the plateau dropped by 20 degrees. "Colonel," Hayes began, his voice dangerously soft, I came here to see a demonstration of a new weapon system. Instead, I saw a demonstration of failed leadership. You have an operator of Sergeant Sharma's caliber under your command, and you're using her as window dressing?" Thorne paled, stammering, "Sir, Her file is sealed. I had no idea. I was not briefed." "You didn't need to be briefed, Colonel." Hayes's voice cracked like a whip. "You needed to be a leader. You needed to listen to your people. You needed to see the talent right in front of your face, instead of trying to put on a dog and pony show. You saw a small woman. You should have seen a professional. You failed. Utterly." The general let the words hang in the air, a public execution of Thorne's career. He then turned to Vance. "Master Sergeant, make sure the sergeant's rifle is cleaned and stowed to her satisfaction, and get her a hot meal. She's earned it." "Yes, General," Vance said, his voice filled with a deep satisfaction. Hayes looked back at Sharma one last time. He didn't offer a handshake or a pat on the back. He simply gave her a nod, a sign of profound professional respect from one warrior to another. Then he turned and walked toward his waiting helicopter, his aide scrambling to keep up. The spell was broken. Lieutenant Miller, his face white, approached Sharma. He looked completely humbled, the arrogant smirk wiped clean from his face forever. "Sergeant," he said, his voice barely a whisper, I apologize for my conduct. That was incredible." Sharma looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Check your data next time, Lieutenant. The mountain always tells the truth." She turned away, leaving him standing there, and began breaking down the XR-50. Her movements were economical, precise. She didn't bask in the moment. The shot was over. The problem was solved. Now it was time to maintain her equipment. This was the ritual. This was the discipline. The praise and the shock of the others were just noise, as transient as the wind. Thorne stood frozen for a long moment, a statue of broken pride. Then, without a word to anyone, he turned and strode away, his career in ruins. The junior snipers watched him go. Then they watched Sharma. They saw the calm, methodical way she cleaned the rifle's bolt, the focused precision of her work. They were witnessing quiet professionalism in its purest form, and the lesson was burning itself into their minds more permanently than any classroom lecture. Vance brought her a toolkit and a container of hot coffee. "Figured you could use this," he said. "Thanks, Master Sergeant," she said, taking the coffee. The warmth felt good in her hands. "Valkyrie, huh?" Vance said quietly, a hint of a grin on his face. "I knew you were something special. The way you were reading that wind. I haven't seen anyone do that since my first tour with a guy named Gunny Hathcock." Sharma gave a rare, small smile. "He wrote the book." "Yeah, he did," Vance said. "Looks like you've written a new chapter." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, as the sun began to dip below the western peaks, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The harsh light of midday softened into the forgiving glow of dusk. The wind, its thievery done for the day, began to die down, sighing itself to sleep in the canyons. One by one, the other Marines finished packing their own gear, their movements now subdued, respectful. They kept a wide berth around Sharma, as if she occupied a sacred space. They loaded their equipment onto the transport trucks. The usual loud jokes and boisterous talk replaced by a quiet, contemplative mood. They had come to the mountain to show off their strength and had instead been shown the meaning of true mastery. When Sharma finished, the rifle was immaculate, its components oiled and stowed perfectly in their case. She had reassembled her own kit with the same meticulous care. She stood up, slinging her pack over her shoulders. The plateau was nearly empty now. The trucks were loaded, engines rumbling in the twilight. Master Sergeant Vance walked with her towards the last truck. "You know," he said, "Thorne's going to get reassigned." probably to some desk at the Pentagon organizing paper clips. They'll need a new OIC for this place. Sharma just nodded, her gaze on the distant horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. A lot of folks are going to be talking about this, Vance continued. That shot, it's going to be a legend. It was just math, Sharma said. The wind did most of the work. Vance chuckled. If you say so, Sergeant, if you say so. She climbed into the back of the transport truck and took a seat in the corner, away from the others. She was just another soldier in the fading light. The truck rumbled to life, its headlights cutting a path through the encroaching darkness. As it pulled away from the firing line, she looked back at the mountain one last time. It stood silhouetted against the twilight, immense, ancient, and silent. It had presented a problem. She had solved it. She pulled her datapad from her pouch. The screen cast a soft green glow on her face. She opened a file, a complex ballistics chart filled with her own handwritten notes and equations. She found the entry for the 4,500-meter shot and entered the final confirmed data from the day. Elevation, windage, atmospheric conditions. A successful first-round engagement. She closed the file. For her, the legend was already just another data point in a long and quiet career. The truck descended the winding mountain road, leaving the high, thin air behind. Inside, surrounded by the quiet respect of her fellow soldiers, Anya Sharma simply began preparing for tomorrow. The job was never done. There would always be another mountain, another wind, another impossible shot waiting, and she would be ready.